I didn't go to his retirement party because I wanted to celebrate him. I went because, in corporate life, the room matters more than the speech. The photos go into the internal newsletter, the handshakes get remembered, and the people who make decisions like to see who shows up when it's not required. So I put on the suit. I fixed the tie. I walked into the hotel ballroom like I belonged there. Because for 12 years, I had. He was already holding court near the bar, surrounded by the same circle that had survived every reorg, every strategic pivot, every round of quiet layoffs that leadership insisted were performance-based. The CEO, Richard Hale, was retiring after 26 years. To the company, he was a legend. To me, he was a man who had built an empire out of other people's work and then taught himself to believe it was all his. I stayed polite. I smiled when I had to. I listened more than I spoke. That's always been my advantage. People think silence means weakness. In offices, silence is usually calculation. The night had all the usual theater, a slideshow of memory lane photos, the VP of HR telling a story that conveniently skipped the lawsuits, and a crowd laughing on cue like the whole company had been one happy family. Then came the part I'll never forget. Richard clinked his glass and motioned for quiet. He looked right at me, dead center like he'd planned it, and said in that casual tone men use when they want to cut you without leaving a mark. Some people are great support, essential even, but not everyone is built for leadership. A few laughs, a few nods. Then he raised his glass a little higher, eyes still on me. And let's be honest, he said, you'll never be an executive here. The room laughed like it was harmless, like it was a joke. I felt it hit my chest anyway, not because I believed him, because he'd made sure for years that the company believed it. I'd been the guy they called when the client was furious, when a contract was bleeding, when a product launch was slipping into disaster. I wasn't flashy. I didn't collect allies with backslaps and promises. I fixed problems and stayed out of the spotlight. And in their world, that meant I was useful, but never one of them. So I did what I always did. I smiled. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I lifted my drink, nodded like I agreed, and let the laughter pass through me. Because that morning, before I walked into that ballroom, I'd already made my move. It started at 6:14 a.m. I was at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at a wire confirmation on my phone. My hands weren't shaking, but my body felt like it was waiting for a car crash. If you've ever signed something that can't be unsaid, you know that feeling. At 6:30, my attorney called. Maya Bennett, corporate transactions. No drama, no fluff. Just a voice that always sounded like she'd already read the worst-case scenario and decided it wasn't worth fearing. Escrow has received the funds, she said. We're clear to close once the last signature hits. Any surprises? I asked. Not unless someone decides to blow up their own payout, she said. They want the money. They'll sign. I should tell you something before this gets misunderstood. I didn't buy the company because I'm some secret billionaire who was hiding stacks of cash under the mattress. This wasn't lottery money. This wasn't magic. This was years of watching the system from the inside, learning how it really works, then using the same rules they used against everyone else. I'd spent a decade building value for a company that treated loyalty like a weakness. And quietly, I'd been building something else. Leverage. 2 years earlier, I'd sold my minority stake in a software consultancy I co-founded before I joined Hale Group. It wasn't a flashy exit, but it was clean. Enough to change my life if I stayed disciplined. I stayed disciplined. While leadership threw money at retreats and executive perks, I invested. Not in memes, not in fantasies. In boring things, diversified funds, municipal bonds, and one very deliberate position I never told anyone at work about. Hale Group itself. See, Hale Group wasn't a public company, but it wasn't a simple family business either. It was privately held with a messy cap table, a founder's family trust, Two early investors who were tired of waiting for an exit, and a long-term employee equity plan that looked generous on paper but came with voting restrictions. The public story was stability. The private reality was pressure. Richard's retirement was creating a problem no one wanted to say out loud: succession and control. His chosen successor, the COO, Mark Vance, had the title, but not the trust of the investors. The investors wanted liquidity. The family trust wanted out, and everyone was terrified of a leadership fight becoming a headline. For months, I'd watched leadership pretend everything was fine while quietly scheduling stakeholder alignment meetings with closed doors and frosted glass. I wasn't in those meetings, but I was the one who cleaned up the operational fires that leaked out of them. And I noticed patterns: emails that suddenly went private, vendors getting nervous, a sudden freeze on hiring that HR couldn't explain. So I did what I always do. I gathered facts. I asked questions that didn't sound like questions. I kept copies of documents that didn't need to be saved. I tracked which law firms started showing up in contract footers. Then one afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, a partner from a boutique investment firm, someone I'd met years ago through my consultancy days. He didn't waste time. "Ethan," he said, "are you aware the Hale Family Trust is shopping their stake?" I didn't answer too fast. In my world, speed can be a confession. "I'm aware the company is changing," I said carefully. "Why?" "Because you're one of the few people who actually knows how it runs," he said. "And because if Mark takes over without real oversight, this place becomes uninvestable." That word stuck, uninvestable. To them, it was a risk metric. To me, it was the most honest description of what Richard had built. They wanted someone who understood operations, who could stabilize leadership, who wouldn't burn the place down to prove a point. They also wanted a deal that could close fast, before Richard's retirement turned into a knife fight. And I realized something in that moment that made my stomach go cold. The company wasn't loyal to Richard. It was loyal to whoever controlled the votes. So I structured an offer, not as a heroic act, not as revenge, as a transaction, an SPV, financing lined up, a purchase agreement with the trust and one investor block, a voting agreement that would hand controlling rights to the buyer the moment it closed. Me. That morning at 9:12 a.m., while Richard's team was rehearsing his farewell speech, my phone buzzed with Maya's text. "Docs signed, escrow cleared, controlling interest transferred." I stared at it for a long time before I let myself breathe. Then I got dressed for the party. Back in the ballroom, Richard finished his toast. People laughed, and I raised my glass like I belonged at the joke. Because I wasn't there as a hopeful employee anymore. I was there as the person who now had the power to decide who belonged in the first place. I stayed another 15 minutes, shook a few hands, and left before dessert. In the car, my phone vibrated again. A calendar invite. Monday, 8 Mile a.m. Role alignment, HR Pasco. No agenda, no context, just a room number. I didn't need them to explain it. They were going to put me back in my place. They just didn't know my place had changed. And I didn't know it yet. But the way they handled that meeting would decide whether this ended quietly, or whether I took everything they'd built their egos on and tore it down using nothing but their own rules. Monday morning, I showed up 10 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted to see who arrived first, who avoided eye contact, and who looked like they'd rehearsed their lines. You learn a lot in the minutes before someone tries to take something from you. The role alignment meeting was on the 14th floor in a glass conference room that overlooked the city. Hale Group loved rooms like that. They made you feel small on purpose, like the view was a reminder that the company was bigger than you. HR was already there. Dinah Klein, VP of People. The kind of executive who spoke in soft phrases that sounded supportive until you realized they were designed to leave no paper trail. Next to her sat Mark Vance, the COO and Richard's chosen successor. He had the posture of a man who'd spent years waiting for a throne and still wasn't sure if it would fit him. They didn't offer coffee. They didn't offer small talk. Dana smiled like we were about to discuss my growth plan. "Ethan," she said, opening a folder, "we want to ensure you're supported through the transition." There it was. Transition. The word they used when they wanted people to accept change without asking who was benefiting. Mark leaned forward. "Richard spoke highly of your operational instincts," he said. "But with the new structure coming, we're tightening leadership lanes." I nodded once. Calm. Neutral. Dana slid a single page across the table. It wasn't a contract. It was a memo. Title adjustment. Effective immediately. My current title, Senior Program Director, was being replaced with something that sounded similar, but carried no authority. Program Support Lead. No direct reports. No budget sign-off. No access to executive dashboards. And the line that made it clear this was punishment dressed as policy: employee will report to the Director of Administrative Operations. That role was 2 levels below where I'd been operating. It was the corporate version of putting someone in the corner and calling it restructuring. Dana watched my face like she was waiting for me to react. Mark's eyes stayed on the paper, not on me. That told me everything. He didn't want to own this. He just wanted it done. "Is there a reason?" I asked. Dana's smile didn't move. "We're reducing decision bottlenecks. Your strengths are execution. This gives you clarity." Execution. That word again. Useful. Not valued. Mark added like he was reading from a script. "We need you in a lane where you can be effective without confusion." Confusion. As if I'd been the one blurring lines after 12 years of cleaning up their messes. I set the memo down carefully. Not because it mattered, but because my hands were already making a choice. Don't give them a reaction they can quote. "I understand," I said. Dana's shoulders relaxed a fraction, like she'd won. "Great," she said. "Then we'll proceed with access updates today. IT will transition your permissions by noon." I looked at her. "By noon?" "Yes," she said, still smiling. "It's standard." Standard meant cut you off fast before you can protect yourself. I nodded once more. "Okay." Mark leaned back like the tension had passed. "We appreciate your flexibility." I didn't correct him. I left the room, walked straight to my office, closed the door, and sat down without turning on the lights. For 30 seconds, I did nothing but listen. To the HVAC hum, the faint office chatter outside, the quiet thump of my own pulse. Then I opened my laptop, not my work laptop, my personal one. Because the first thing you learn about power is this: the company controls what you do on their devices. I logged into the secure portal Maya had set up for me. 2-factor, encrypted, nothing that belonged to Hale Group, and there it was again, clean, brutal, undeniable, controlling interest, voting rights transferred, effective immediately. I stared at it the way you stare at a weapon you didn't know you were holding until you needed it. They were trying to demote me, while I legally held the votes that could remove them. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt angry, because of the timing, because of the arrogance, because they'd sat across from me and spoken about support, while quietly planning to strip me of everything I'd built inside that company. And because now I understood the truth that had been sitting under my career the whole time. It had never been about whether I was executive material. It was about whether I was controllable. I opened my work email just to see what they were already doing. 3 messages hit at once. Facilities. Office relocation scheduled. Please pack personal items by 3 p.m. Permission adjustments in progress. Some tools may be temporarily unavailable. Org update, an internal announcement draft, sent accidentally to a wider list than intended. My name was there, but not where it should have been. They'd removed me from the leadership structure entirely and placed me under administrative operations, like I was a helper, like I'd never run multi-million-dollar client escalations. never held contracts together by force of competence. And the worst part? The email ended with, "We're excited for Ethan to continue supporting our success in this refined capacity." Refined, a polite word for reduced. I forwarded the email to my personal address. Then I took screenshots. Not because I was planning a dramatic moment, because I knew what comes next in corporate life. They deny, they edit, they rewrite history. So I built evidence. At 11:47, my Slack access flickered and then vanished. At 11:52, my dashboard logins failed. At 11:58, my calendar disappeared like I'd never existed. They weren't just demoting me, they were isolating me, cutting me away from information, relationships, and leverage. That's what they always did to people who might fight back. I stood up, walked into the hallway, and watched employees move past me without looking too long. People sense shifts like animals sense storms. No one wants to be near the person leadership is pushing out. I could have walked into Mark's office right then. I could have said, "You have no idea what you just did." But I didn't. Because if you reveal your power too early, people don't admit their motives. They switch strategies. They start lying better. So instead, I played the role they'd assigned me. I went to my new supervisor's office, Steve from Administrative Ops, who looked like he was about to apologize for existing. "Ethan," he said quickly, standing up. I didn't ask for this. They just told me that you'd be under my function now." I held up a hand. "It's fine," I said, gentle. "I just need to know what they told you." He swallowed. "That you're being repositioned, that you were too close to executive decisions, that it's best for continuity." I nodded as if that made sense. Steve continued quieter. "They also told me not to involve you in client-facing meetings anymore." There it was, not support. Containment. I walked back to my desk with my face calm and my jaw tight. They'd publicly humiliated me at a retirement party. Then they tried to bury me on Monday morning, and now they were cutting me away from the clients, the one thing they couldn't fully control if I decided to speak. I sat down and opened the shareholder agreement again. And this time, I didn't read it like a document. I read it like a map. There were clauses about governance, about removal, about emergency meetings and voting thresholds. There were procedures for calling a board session, who could request it, how quickly it had to be scheduled, what constituted material risk. They thought I was just a demoted employee. But legally, I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was the majority vote behind the curtain. And once I understood the rules, I understood the only question that mattered. How far were they willing to go to keep me in my lane? Because whatever their next move was, it would decide whether I handled this quietly, or whether I made them feel for the first time in their careers what it's like to be powerless in a room full of smiling people. By Tuesday, the building felt different. Not because the lighting changed or the hallways got quieter, because people stopped meeting my eyes. It was subtle at first, a quick glance away, a conversation that ended the moment I turned the corner. In an office, that's how you know leadership has started whispering. They don't have to announce you're being buried. They just teach everyone to treat you like a risk. I sat at my desk anyway, what was left of it, without access to the systems I used to run. No dashboards, no live client escalations, no finance portal. Even my shared drive looked like a blank wall. They'd taken my tools and expected me to become harmless. I could have walked out. A lot of people would have. And part of me wanted to, just to prove I wasn't dependent on them for anything. But I didn't, because I wasn't staying for dignity anymore. I was staying for information. Around 10:30 a.m., Steve from Admin Ops stopped by again, awkward like he'd been forced to deliver a bad message to a man twice his size. "Mark asked me to remind you," he said quietly. "You're not supposed to join the Illinois client status call." I looked up. "Which client?" Steve hesitated. "Grayson Health." My stomach tightened. Grayson Health wasn't just any client. They were our largest enterprise contract, multi-year, high margin, The kind of account that made quarterly reports look healthy, even when everything else was bleeding. And I'd been the one who rebuilt that relationship after a previous executive tried to squeeze them and nearly got us terminated for cause. I kept my face neutral. Understood, I said. Steve exhaled like I'd let him off the hook. When he left, I didn't go near the call. I didn't have access anyway. Instead, I opened my personal notes, offline, where I kept a running record of every major client risk, every operational failure leadership liked to hide, and every temporary workaround that had somehow become permanent. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail until the caller ID resolved into a name I recognized immediately. Nora Ellison, Grayson Health, I answered on the second ring. Ethan, Nora said, voice tight. Are you on the call? Because I'm staring at 6 people who don't know the history of their own contract. I leaned back in my chair slowly. They told me not to join, I said. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the conference room noise on her end. They told us you were transitioning out of leadership, she said. Is that true? I chose my words carefully. They changed my title. That's not what I asked, she said. Nora never played games. I stared at the city through the glass window and felt something shift inside me. Something that had been tightening for years. This wasn't about my pride anymore. This was about a company that had gotten so comfortable abusing people that it believed consequences were optional. I'm still here, I said finally, but I'm not the one making decisions on your account right now. Nora let out a sharp breath. Then tell me who is, because the person speaking just told me your team can reinterpret the uptime penalties in Appendix C. I closed my eyes for half a second. Appendix C was not reinterpretable. It was a hard penalty schedule. They'd negotiated it themselves. And if they tried to play word games with Grayson, we wouldn't just lose the client. We'd get sued. Nora, I said calm, don't agree to anything today. Ask them to put it in writing and email you the proposed language. That's what I'm doing, she said, but I need to know one thing. I could hear her stepping out of the room. Her voice dropped. Did they cut you out because you were the only one telling the truth? I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was worse. They cut me out because I was a barrier between their ego and everyone else's reality. I'll call you back in an hour, I said. Forward me whatever they send. When I ended the call, I sat still, phone in my hand, and felt the first real crack. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something heavier. Realization. They weren't just demoting me, they were putting the company at risk, publicly, confidently, because they believed the rules only applied to people below them. And I didn't know it yet, but they were already doing something worse behind the scenes. At 12:06 p.m., I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Lena Park, Finance. Lena had been an analyst when I first joined Hale Group. I'd mentored her quietly, helped her prep for meetings, taught her how to read executive language, warned her about smiling threats. She'd moved up fast because she was sharp, and because she never forgot who treated her like a human being. Her text was short. Are you alone? I stared at it. Then I typed back, yes. What's going on? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then, they're calling it executive transition retention. It's not retention, it's a payout. My jaw tightened. What kind of payout? Her next message came with a file. I shouldn't send this, but you need to see it before they bury it. I opened it. A spreadsheet, clean formatting, finance team style, titled Executive Transition Package, Confidential. And there it was, line by line, a 6-figure consulting agreement for Richard after retirement, a retention bonus for Mark Vance, a separate change leadership hardship stipend for Dana Klein, legal fees allocated to a firm I recognized from recent contract footers, and one line that made my hands go cold. Accelerated vendor settlements, discretionary. That wasn't normal. That wasn't routine. That was an attempt to move cash fast enough that once it was gone, it would be hard to claw back without an investigation. I scrolled. reading the notes column. One note was highlighted. Execute prior to board reconstitution. Board reconstitution. They were planning to lock in payouts before anyone new could challenge them, before the people with votes could stop it. Before me. My breath went shallow for a second, because this wasn't a petty power play anymore. This was a coordinated extraction. And if I let it happen, I wouldn't just be the guy who got demoted. I'd be the controlling shareholder who let leadership loot the company on the way out. I typed Lena a single response. Did Mark approve this? She replied instantly. Yes. And HR is pushing it through as continuity. They're rushing signatures. I stared at my screen and felt the final break, the moment the last bit of loyalty died. That night, I stopped being the hero, not the fixer, not the loyal employee who protected leadership from their own incompetence. I stood up, shut off my work computer, and walked out without telling anyone where I was going. I drove straight to Maya's office. She didn't look surprised when I walked in. She looked prepared, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. I placed my phone on her desk and slid it toward her. Tell me this is stoppable, I said. She looked at the spreadsheet for less than a minute before her expression hardened. It's stoppable, she said, but not with a conversation. She opened a folder and pulled out a set of documents already drafted. Formal, structured, the language of power. A notice to the corporate secretary. A demand for records under shareholder inspection rights. A request to convene an emergency board meeting due to material risk. And a written instruction to freeze any extraordinary compensation or retention packages pending governance review. I stared at the papers. You already had these ready, I said. Maya met my eyes, because people like this always do the same thing when they're scared. They try to take money and control before anyone can stop them. My throat tightened. For the first time since the retirement party, I felt something like relief. Not because I'd won, but because I finally knew exactly what I was dealing with. I wasn't facing insults. I was facing a system that would burn the building down as long as the executives got out, carrying the safe. Maya slid a pen toward me. If you sign this, she said, they'll know someone with authority is watching. They'll panic. They'll make mistakes. I picked up the pen. And as I signed my name, I realized the real reason they demoted me so quickly. They didn't just want me quiet. They wanted me blind. At 7:03 p.m., Maya hit send. The email went to the corporate secretary, the board counsel, and the firm listed on their payout sheet. 3 recipients, 1 subject line, emergency governance action, material risk. Maya leaned back, calm. They have a window, she said, a small one. They'll try to move fast before the meeting is forced. I stared at my phone, already vibrating with new notifications, because somewhere, in a corner office, someone had just read that email and realized the person they'd publicly humiliated at a retirement party had the power to call the room to order, and now they were going to do whatever desperate people do when they think they're about to lose control. By Wednesday morning, the air in the building felt charged, like everyone had been told a storm was coming, but nobody knew where it would hit. At 8:06 a.m., my phone rang. It was Mark Vance. He'd never called me directly unless something was on fire. Ethan, he said, too calm, we need to clear up a misunderstanding. I didn't speak right away. I wanted him to keep talking. Dana's voice came through in the background, tight, urgent. Put him on speaker, Mark continued. That email from your attorney, it's unnecessary. We're handling continuity. You're overreacting. I stared at the wall in my dim office, the one they were trying to relocate me out of by 3:00 p.m. Continuity, I repeated. Yes, he said. You're creating risk. I almost laughed. They'd cut my access, removed me from the client calls, and tried to rush a payout package before board changes, and now I was the risk. I'm not creating anything, I said. I'm documenting it. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear Dana whisper, He knows. Mark's tone hardened. Let's meet. 10 minutes. My office. No, I said. What? He snapped. I'll communicate through counsel, I replied, calm. That's the cleanest way. And then his voice changed, smaller, more personal. You think you're untouchable because you have a lawyer? I finally gave him something, not anger, just the truth. I think you're panicking because you moved money you can't justify. Click! He hung up, and then silence, the kind that means something has gone wrong. At 8:19, I got an email from IT. Subject: account review, action required. My remaining access would be temporarily suspended, pending a routine security audit. Routine. I'd seen that word used like a weapon. 2 minutes later, Steve from Admin Ops appeared at my door, pale. They're saying security is coming, he whispered. They want your badge. I stood slowly, not because I was scared, because I wanted my movements to look controlled on any camera they might pull. Later. Who told you? I asked. Dana, he said. She said you're acting unpredictably. Unpredictably. For sending an email through counsel, I nodded once. Okay. I took my phone, my personal laptop, and the small notebook I'd been keeping offline. I left everything else, because I wanted them to have nothing to claim I stole. When security arrived, it wasn't some dramatic escort. It was 2 contractors in ill-fitting uniforms, clearly uncomfortable. One of them cleared his throat. Sir, we need your badge. I handed it over without argument. Dana had trained everyone to expect a scene. I didn't give her one. As they walked me toward the elevator, I caught glimpses through glass walls. People pretending not to watch. People who'd laughed at the retirement party now studying their screens, like their lives depended on it, because they did. In the lobby, my phone buzzed again. Maya. Do not speak to anyone in the building, she said immediately. Not Mark, not Dana, not HR. I'm filing the consent. Consent? I asked. Majority shareholder written consent, she said, clipped. It's allowed under their governance documents. You sign, you act. We're reconstituting the board. My pulse stayed steady, but something in my chest finally loosened. Not relief, clarity. I stepped outside into the cold air and walked to my car like I still belonged here, because legally, I did. At 9:02 a.m., I was in Maya's conference room signing papers that didn't feel real. Not a speech, not a fight. Pages of clean language that turned power into procedure. A written shareholder consent removing 2 directors aligned with Richard's trust. A consent appointing 2 independent directors with real credentials. Former audit chair types, not Richard's golf buddies. A directive scheduling an emergency board meeting that afternoon, and a formal notice to preserve records, emails, chats, payout drafts, vendor settlement approvals. Maya slid the final page toward me. This is the part that makes them sweat, she said. It was a resolution, conditional on the new board's first meeting, to freeze extraordinary compensation and non-routine disbursements pending review. In plain English? I asked. In plain English, she said. They can't wire themselves a goodbye bonus without the board approving it, and the board won't. I signed. At 9:27 a.m., Maya hit send again, this time to the corporate secretary, with attached consents, and copied to board counsel. At 9:31 a.m., my phone lit up with messages I wasn't supposed to receive anymore. Lena from finance. They're yelling, Mark is in the controller's office. Then another. Dana is telling people you were escorted out for security reasons. Then the one that mattered. They're trying to push the wire anyway. Controller refused. Mark is demanding it. Good. Let them make it worse. Because when desperate people don't get what they want, they stop thinking strategically. They start leaving fingerprints. At 10:05 a.m., Nora from Grayson Health emailed me directly, using my personal address from an old thread. Your COO is claiming penalty language is flexible. Are we still dealing in facts? I forwarded it to Maya and responded with one line. Do not accept changes verbally. Require written proposals. You're right to pause. I wasn't saving the company. I was preventing them from lighting another fire while I handled the first one. By late morning, the rumors reached the outside world, because someone always leaks when they're trying to control the narrative. A recruiter texted me, "Heard you got walked out. You okay?" A former colleague messaged, "Mark says you're unstable. Is that true?" That one made my jaw tighten, not because it hurt, because it was predictable. When you can't beat someone on facts, you attack their credibility. So I did what I always do. I documented. Maya's team pulled the building access logs, showing my badge was deactivated after I refused to meet Mark privately. We preserved the IT email timestamps. We preserved the internal org update draft. We preserved Lena's payout sheet and her chat messages. And at 12:18 p.m., we received the single dumbest email Dana could have sent. It came from her assistant, accidentally CC'd to an HR distribution list. Per Dana, do not engage Ethan. Route all inquiries to HR. Refer to him as a security concern. A security concern, in writing. Maya stared at it for 3 seconds, then looked at me. They just handed us motive, she said. They're trying to intimidate you and isolate dissent. I didn't smile. But inside, something snapped into place. That afternoon, the emergency board meeting was held by video, because half the board suddenly had travel conflicts, which is executive for fear. Mark joined late, face tight, eyes darting. Dana joined from a conference room, posture straight, expression serene, like she was still performing. Board council opened with formality. Then Maya spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply walked them through documents. The cap table change, the written consent, the board reconstitution, the accelerated payout plan, the note, execute prior to board reconstitution. You could feel the temperature change through a screen. Mark tried to interrupt. This is a hostile action, he said. He's an employee with a grievance. Maya didn't even look at him. He is the controlling shareholder, she said, and he's exercising lawful governance rights to address material financial risk. Then one of the new independent directors, an older man with the calm tone of someone who'd chaired audit committees through real disasters, leaned forward. "Mr. Vance," he said, "did you authorize extraordinary compensation and accelerated vendor settlements without full board review?" Mark's mouth opened, then closed. Dana cut in quickly. "It was continuity planning." The director didn't blink. "Answer the question." Mark's voice came out thin. "We had discretion." That was the moment, not the dramatic reveal, the micro-catharsis. Because in corporate life, the downfall isn't a punch. It's a single sentence that proves you don't understand your own authority. The director nodded once. "Then we'll remove the discretion." Board counsel read the resolution. Immediate freeze on non-routine disbursements. Immediate preservation of records. Immediate independent review of executive transition packages. And then the final item, delivered like a formality. A vote on Mark Vance's interim authority, pending investigation. Mark's face tightened. "You can't." The director cut him off. "We can," he said. "We just did." The vote passed, cleanly, procedurally. No shouting, no theatrics. Just power moving where it belonged. After the meeting ended, Maya looked at me. "They're going to try one last move," she said. "People like this always do." My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered, and a voice I hadn't heard in years said quietly, "This is Richard Hale. We need to talk. Alone." I stared at the wall, feeling the calm settle in. Not peace yet, but inevitability. Because now the real question wasn't whether they'd lose. It was how much damage they'd try to do on the way down. Richard Hale's voice on the phone was softer than I remembered. Not kinder, just quieter. Like the room had finally stopped laughing with him, and he was trying to remember how to speak without an audience. "We need to talk," he repeated. "Alone." I looked at Maya across her desk. She didn't react, just held eye contact, waiting for my choice. I kept my tone neutral. "If you have something to say, you can say it through counsel." A pause. Then Richard exhaled, controlled, practiced. You're making a mistake. Mark and Dana acted to protect the company. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him, because the board documents already had their fingerprints. Richard, I said calmly, you humiliated me in front of the company. Then they tried to strip my access. Then they tried to move money before governance changed. That isn't protection. His voice tightened. You think you're the first person who's ever been told no? I almost smiled. Almost. Maybe not, I said. But I might be the first person you've told no to who could vote. Silence. Not the dramatic kind. The practical kind. The kind where someone finally calculates the cost of their own arrogance. Richard tried again, slower. What do you want? That question is always the end of the old order, because it's the moment the powerful stop assuming. They start negotiating. I want the company stable, I said. I want the client accounts protected. I want payroll protected. And I want a clean leadership transition that doesn't involve people emptying the house on the way out. Richard's tone went colder. So you want my people gone? I didn't flinch at my people. Yes, I said, if the facts support it. He didn't like that answer because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. And procedure is what removes kings. Richard's last line came out sharper. You're overplaying your hand. I kept my voice even. Richard, I'm not playing. I'm voting. I ended the call. For a second, my hands were perfectly still on the table. No adrenaline, no shaking, just a clear, clean sense of finality. Maya slid another document across to me. Next step, she said. We let the process do the work. The independent directors had already engaged an outside firm, standard practice when executive payouts and governance issues were involved. They wanted a third party to review the transition compensation package, the accelerated vendor settlements, any attempts to modify client contract terms without approval. The security concern narrative HR had pushed to isolate me. And because the board had passed record preservation, IT was required to lock down email archives and chat logs. You can't erase what's already been held in place by formal resolution. By Friday, the results came faster than I expected. Not because we rushed, because Mark and Dana had been sloppy in the way arrogant people are sloppy. They assume no one will ever look. Maya called me into her office and laid out the timeline like a physician delivering a diagnosis. Here's what they did, she said, and here's what they wrote. She didn't need to embellish. The facts were enough. Mark had approved a compensation structure that bypassed full board review and used continuity as cover. Dana had directed HR to brand me a security concern after I refused to meet privately. And the vendor settlement acceleration, supposedly routine, had been tied to a short list of vendors with personal relationships to executives. It wasn't a Hollywood heist. It was the corporate version, extraction with paperwork and polite language, which meant it was easier to prove. That afternoon, the board held a final session. No speeches, no shouting, just votes. The chair, one of the independent directors, opened with one sentence. We will address misconduct, restore governance integrity, and reduce operational risk effective immediately. Then he read the resolutions. Mark Vance was removed from interim authority and placed on administrative leave pending final findings. Donna Klein was placed on leave as well, and HR operations were shifted under interim oversight. The executive transition packages were terminated and restructured under board review, and the vendor settlement acceleration was halted, with a directive to review conflicts of interest. Mark tried to argue. Of course he did. He said I was retaliating. He said I was disrupting stability. He said I was just an employee with a grudge. The chair didn't raise his voice. He just said calmly, "You're not being punished. You are being governed." That was it. That was the whole ending. Not vengeance, not fireworks. A system doing what it was supposed to do, once the right people controlled it. After the meeting, I drove back to the office building for the first time since security took my badge, not to reclaim a desk, to close the loop. The lobby was the same. The guard recognized me and stood up, unsure. I nodded once. "I'm here for a scheduled meeting," I said. He checked his list, because now my name actually belonged there, and handed me a temporary badge without hesitation. Upstairs, the executive floor felt quieter than it ever had. When you remove the people who fill space with ego, the silence becomes clean. Steve from Admin Ops saw me near the elevators and froze. "Ethan," he said quickly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what they were doing." "I know," I said, and I meant it, because Steve wasn't the problem. He was the kind of person they used to make dirty decisions look normal. I walked into the same conference room where Dana had slid that demotion memo across the table. The seats were empty this time. No folder, no smiles, no scripts. Just the city outside the window, calm and indifferent. A few minutes later, Nora from Grayson Health joined by video. She looked at me and I didn't bother with small talk. "So," she said, "are we dealing with adults again?" I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was still tight. "Yes," I said, "we are." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then here's what we need." We went through the contract line by line. We aligned on the penalty schedule. We corrected the language Mark's team had tried to reinterpret. We set a timeline for service improvements that was realistic and measurable. When the call ended, Nora paused. "I heard what they said about you," she said quietly. I didn't respond. She continued. "In my world, the person they tried to silence is usually the person keeping the whole thing standing." I held her gaze through the screen. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not keeping it standing for them anymore." After that, I met with the new board chair. He didn't flatter me. He didn't act like I was the savior. He treated me like what I was now, a stakeholder with responsibility. "We need stability," he said, "not revenge." I nodded. "Agreed." He slid a document toward me. A formal offer, an executive role with clear authority, reporting lines and accountability. Real governance, real oversight, real checks. Not a crown, a job. And the first time in my career, the title didn't feel like something I was begging to be allowed to wear. It felt earned. When I left the building that evening, I didn't feel high. I felt quiet. Satisfaction doesn't always feel like celebration. Sometimes it feels like the end of noise. Later that night, I got one more message, an internal company-wide email from the board chair. It was short, corporate, carefully worded, but one sentence landed like a final door closing. Effective immediately, leadership changes have been implemented to protect our stakeholders and restore governance integrity. No mention of me. No apology, no drama. And that was perfect. Because the point was never to be seen. The point was to make sure the next time someone tried to laugh a person into silence, they remembered that the rules don't care who's holding the glass. They only care who holds the vote.